a copy of the recording, please shoot me an email and I'm happy to go ahead and provide a copy of it. So for those of you joining today, my name is Arti Soma. I am an attorney and partner at DPA Attorneys at Law. And today we'll be talking all about the ADA. The idea is that you guys take control of your property to avoid being sued. And we are going to talk about what are the top things that we are seeing in drive-by ADA suits, in ADA website suits, and so on and so forth. So that being said, we're going to be covering a range of topics today, from physical barrier lawsuits to website ADA lawsuits to solutions to prevent these lawsuits, what to do when you've been sued, and how to control your guys' destiny, right? There are ways that we can prevent a lot of these situations before they occur and happen. Many of them are obvious and just sitting in your parking lot or sitting in your lobby. And so we're going to go over those things that you guys can really get a handle on before an actual drive-by ADA suit occurs. So here, meet our friend Joe. This is a very realistic that we're seeing in a lot of hotels. Really, let's just say a guest is at your hotel, they have a disability, and they're asking for a late checkout. You know, he calls the front desk and he's asking. However, the hotel's sold out because they have a bunch of incoming reservations. Well, our go-to response is always, we're sold out. Whether the hotel is sold out or not, we don't always want to give late checkouts, right? Or we'll say our policy doesn't allow late checkouts. The problem is, under the ADA, hotels are required to offer public accommodations to their guests that have disabilities if it is feasible, right? So that means if it's something that you're easily able to provide to your guest, you're easily able to move things around. Maybe you have a different reservation going into Joe's room. Maybe it's something as easy as putting him into room, 103 or 104 as opposed to room 101. Then you're supposed to be doing that in order to accommodate essentially his late checkout. Now, you don't have to, but it's a pretty high bar, right? You would have to be, let's just say, a super sold out holiday weekend where there's no choice but to have Joe leave. Really, the key point here is, you don't have to automatically grant Joe's request, but you have to consider it. So let's say your front desk were to get this call, right? You might be wondering, well, then how should I respond? And a better response would probably be something like, thank you for letting us know. Let me see what we can do. How much additional time would you like? And then also having your front desk mention, by the way, we are sold out today. So I just need to check whether we can adjust housekeeping or room assignments around without affecting the next guest reservation. Let me just speak to my manager and I'll get back to you shortly, right? What we're doing here and with a response like that is, we're not asking about specific diagnoses. We're not asking him to prove his disability. We're not asking what accommodation he needs and whether the hotel can reasonably provide it. Really, we're just asking, what is he looking for? We're saying, let me take a look. And then your front desk can take a look into it, right? The idea is that maybe your housekeeping can clean that room last. Maybe the incoming guest, again, can move to another room. Maybe the guy just needs 30 minutes to an hour, right? And we can all reasonably accommodate that. And that's ideally the best outcome. Again, if you truly, truly cannot grant the late checkout because the room needs to be cleaned by a specific time, you've already guaranteed an early check-in, and that's your only ADA room that you have, then you're basically going to have to just give them a response like, unfortunately, because the hotel is fully committed today, this room is already assigned to an incoming guest, and we're not able to extend your checkout time, and then go ahead and try to provide them alternative, accommodations. Like, we can store your luggage. You're more than welcome to wait in the lobby. We do have access to a restroom if you need while you're waiting. I'm more than happy to help you come up with transportation to get to where you need to go. Basically, the bottom line is you don't want to make it look like you immediately said no, because now all of a sudden Joe can point fingers and say, well, they're not accommodating me and giving me late checkout just because I'm disabled. And we already know and probably have experienced similar Joes under their names at our hotels. And so we don't want to give them, more options that they can use against us. So if they do make a request, have your front desk document that request, document, what analysis was used to respond to that, what was offered, and then just train your staff in general not to use blanket statements like no. So now we're going to talk about some of the most common ADA lawsuits that we're seeing against hotels and businesses. Really, these usually fall within three categories. We're first looking at what people commonly refer to as drive-by suits. Unfortunately, this is all too common in California. And for those of you that don't know, this is where plaintiffs are basically coming by your property. They're taking photographs, they're looking at your parking lot, they're looking at paths of travel, your signage, your entrances, and they are not even staying at your property. Frankly, they don't even have an intention of staying at your property, but they're taking all this information to use as a claim against you later on. Then we have the guests that actually do stay at your property. These cases are typically a lot more detailed, right? When they're staying in your property, frankly, there might be, if you're not in your property, a lot more ADA problems now that they are experiencing. Maybe they are indulging in your free breakfast and now you have issues with your breakfast area. Maybe they are, jumping in your pool and your pool lift isn't working. In your room, maybe the size of the aisles between the bed and the walls isn't large enough. Maybe you don't have those grab bars. So there's a lot more things now they can add into their complaint or lawsuit if they're actually staying at your property. And the third, and it's the most frustrating part for business owners, this is really your physical barrier law. This is the black and white law, right? This is the specific numbers that the ADA says your slope needs to be, or the width of your access aisle, or the length of your ADA parking spots, or the certain signage that you're supposed to display. It's called black and white because it's very black and white, whether you're in the wrong or whether you're in the right. I like to say it's just like the speeding limit, right? The speed limit is 65 miles per hour on the highway. If you drive 66, you are unfortunately breaking the law. You can get a speeding ticket just for driving 66 because the law is right there, plain and simple. It's 65 is the speeding limit. So that's what we look at when we're looking at black and white ADA law. So this picture should look very familiar. Most of you should have ADA parking spots already in your parking lot, or you're building a brand new property ground up and it looks something like this. But some of you may think, all right, well, this looks good, right? We've got some striping. It looks like it was recently sealed, recently painted. I see some logos on the ground. I see some signage. This looks like it might be ADA compliant. Unfortunately, it is not. This is an example really of how small parking lot issues really turn into these huge ADA lawsuits, right? A lot of business owners would look at this parking space and think, all right, well, we got most of the stuff covered. It looks like everything's pretty much there. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, right? Again, we do need to make sure we're measuring our spaces, make sure we have the proper width, length, signage, and the proper access aisles, right? The issue really in this photograph is that the second accessible stall doesn't actually function as an accessible stall, right? The truck is parked in the area where there should have been cross-hatched, or the cross-hatching that you see on the left of the gray car should be in the middle of those two ADA parking spots so they can both use that accessible pathway. And the idea is that once a car parks, right, you should be able to open your door, put your wheelchair there, hop in, and there's not another car jammed against you where you can't do that. So this is exactly the type of common situation that a lot of the drive-by ADA plaintiffs are looking for, right? There's no need for them to go inside of your property. They can just drive right into your parking lot, take a couple photos, and now you have an ADA lawsuit on your hands. So really the important takeaway here is that your parking lots are usually the first place that these plaintiffs are looking at. Some of these law firms are now sending even investigators to different hotels in their parking lots because they're considered, semi-public places. And so people that are now professionals are looking and marking every single issue that you are having in your parking lot. So from a defense perspective, right, you're probably wondering, well, what can we do, Artie? Like, we constantly have somebody driving by and suing me for the same issues. Well, see what are those same issues, right? You have to weigh the cost of fixing the issue versus the cost of not fixing it and possibly getting an ADA claim against you, right? Striping a parking lot, not that expensive. Adding the proper signage, not that expensive, right? Fixing your slope, yeah, that could be a little expensive. So, frankly, what I do tell my clients most of the time is fix everything that is the most obvious to your eye. And then when it comes to those really costly items like fixing the actual slope of your property, um, it's fine. Maybe take the loss on that one if you end up having a claim. But more often than not, you're going to get claims for multiple items, right? For each violation you have, it's between $2,000 to $4,000. And so if the only violation you have is a slope issue on your property, well, then typically these drive-by cases, it's not worth that law firm to represent them in just that one issue, right? So they're going to be looking for multiple issues. So try to do the majority of the ones that you can take care of that is going to be the most cost effective. Um, I may seem like I'm an expert in this. I just know the really common stuff that happens. I do have an amazing CASP inspector though, and he is so generous in offering his time for free when it comes to our clients. And so you guys are always more than welcome to take a picture of whatever you want at your hotel, and you can send it to me, and I will have him look at it, and he'll literally give you a free evaluation just based off of your photos. Obviously, if you want like a proper cast report, he can do that too, and I can give you guys a quote. But if there's something, that you quickly just want an evaluation on, go ahead and send your photos my way, and I'm happy to go ahead and send it to him for an evaluation. All right. Loading zones, right? So we're thinking about the front entrance where guests are unloading their luggage, where maybe they're waiting for their Uber or their Lyft or your hotel shuttle. Maybe they're getting dropped off by a taxi, or maybe somebody else is dropping them off. Really, the ADA issue here that we are seeing is the access aisle is not just extra space, right? It's part of the accessible feature for that loading zone. So you can see that there is the yellow strip, right? And then in front of that yellow strip is the actual access aisle. And that's so that a car can pull up next to it. And again, they can open their door, set up the wheelchair, and hop on out. Again, these comes with specific dimensions and requirements, right? I'm happy to go ahead and send a copy of this presentation. You guys can take a photo of it now, or I can send you this diagram later on. But all of these things are important. For those of you that have had drive-by ADA suits, sometimes you'll see a picture and there's literally the person put a measuring tape on the floor and then took a picture of it just to prove how it was, not as wide as it should be or not the proper length. And again, we get into the issue of that black and white law. So when we see luggage and cones and planters and things that are blocking that access aisle, a lot of times I'll see trash cans. Unfortunately, it's not accessible, right? You may meet all of those requirements of measurements and paint and all that good stuff, but as soon as you got something within that territory that's blocking somebody from entering that space, well, now you are no longer compliant. So the photo really here is a good example of hotels that often have front entrance as their temporary staging area, and something that you guys can implement for your hotels, right? So one of the first things, in addition to looking at your ADA parking spaces, the plaintiff is going to want to do is they're going to be counting how many ADA parking spots you actually have. Now, the ADA has a specific table. It's based on the total number of parking spaces in each lot or parking facility. For example, for every up to 25 parking spaces you have, you need to have at least one accessible space, and so on and so forth. So this table kind of gives you the breakdown of that. Really, the important detail here is that the calculation is done per parking lot or parking facility. It's not necessarily by adding up every parking space across your entire property. So if your hotel has multiple parking lots or a lot and a garage, then each area may need to be evaluated separately. Another thing to note is that van accessible parking under the current ADA standards is 1 every 6 accessible parking spaces. And so keep that in mind when you are counting, again, whether your property is currently ADA compliant and if it has a sufficient amount of spaces. This is a big mistake that a lot of businesses in California are making. They may have one blue handicap space, but then they're missing that one van accessible designation, right? Or the correct access aisle. Now, sometimes people will say, well, I'm only required to have one handicap parking space. So what do I do? Why would I need to have a van one as well? So if you're only required to have one, you would have the same van signage in that same parking space, and then you would meet those same requirements within that same parking space. And that way, you're basically killing two birds with one stone. It starts all with striping. An accessible parking space, it's really not just compliant just because, there's the wheelchair symbol painted on the ground or you have some of the signage there, right? You want to make sure that you have the proper striping within your lot. You want to make sure that it is not faded. It's something that is clear and easy for somebody to be able to see. It's very simple to frankly just go to Home Depot, buy the paint, and you could even have your maintenance man touch it up as it starts to fade, right? And then we also want to make sure that we're having the right signage there. The ADA requires that accessible parking signs do have that international symbol of accessibility, that van accessible spaces are actually identified as van accessible, right? There's this particular sign that goes along with that. Your sign also has to be at a certain height. So making sure your sign is at the right height. I have seen lawsuits where the sign, was considered not to be high enough. And then make sure that that surface decal is there. And then we also want to make sure that we have the right slope, right? I like to say it's like an add-on allegation. Most business owners, especially motel owners, frankly, you just don't have the right slope. Um, the slope ratio is 1 to 48, which is about 2% grade. Um, Hard to measure, but again, many of you that have been sued before and you've seen photo evidence of the proof, you'll see they have their little measuring slope device. They put it on the floor, they take a picture of it showing the slant that's clearly above 2%. So super important that you guys are making sure, again, at least you're covering number 1 and 2, right? With your striping, with your signage. And again, slope is just an add-on. But most likely, if somebody's coming for your property and they're suing you for slope, it's not just for slope issues, right? They're coming at you for more expensive things, and it really comes down to fixing those ahead of time. So now we jump into our next photo, right? Is this ADA compliant? Yes or no? Hopefully, based on everything we've learned so far, you've realized it is not, right? We can see if we're looking at that photo, there is this beautiful little slant. That slant immediately makes this handicap parking spot that we think might be accessible automatically non-compliant because again, you can't have a grade really above 2% in any of the directions from that handicap parking spot, right? And the idea behind that is if you got somebody in a wheelchair, we don't want them to roll away, and they likely won't roll away if your slope is smaller than 2%. So really one important point here is also the pavement markings, it's not the only thing that you need to have. You can see here that there is visible signage and decals also missing. So frankly, anybody can just come into this guy's parking lot, take this photo, and now immediately can sue. So really from a defense perspective, we want current photos from you, right? We're going to want to see measurements. We're going to want to see an inspection by a CASP inspector. We're going to want to know if you truly think that you are in the right. We're going to want all of those items as a defense, so then we can use it against the plaintiff and their counsel. So this slide basically is moving us from the parking lot now into the guest room, right? For hotels, we want to make sure that we do have rooms that are ADA compliant. It's really one of the highest risk areas. I did settle a case last year for think it was $47,000. And this was for somebody that had a reservation. They claimed that, they had a disability. When they first came into the lobby, they rolled in on a wheelchair. And they said from the front desk, they were immediately discriminated against. So these are things that, unfortunately it seems small, but it's something that can add up quickly, right? At the end of the day, it does hurt our bottom line. And so what's the way that we can avoid that? So the table in the middle shows that the minimum number of guest rooms that you need to actually have these mobility features required under the ADA standards. A lot of times you guys will call me and ask me and say, okay, RT, if I only need to have, one room that is handicap accessible, then what room type am I choosing? And I like to say, whatever the most common room type is that is being sold at your property, then that should be the room type that you're using. If you fall within the category where you need two rooms, then it should at least be one room that's a single bed and one room with a double bed. And then you can apply that same logic on and on as you're adding additional rooms to your property. But really having the right number of rooms, it's just the first step, right? You want to make sure that the room itself actually is ADA compliant. And so there's a list of things that you're going to have. I do have a whole report that I can send you of that. Again, my castle inspector, if you think that your room is currently ADA compliant, my cast inspector can go ahead and look at your photos of your room. He'll do it for free. He'll tell you if he sees anything right off the bat that is missing. And so a lot of times in these suits, we're seeing claims involving the shower thresholds, not being the right height, right? You got to be able to roll into those showers, or there's no grab bars, or the grab bars are not in the right place, or your toilet height is not correct, or your bed height's not correct. I can't get underneath the sink because of your vanity being in the way. The width of the door didn't allow me to get in. Your doors need to be a certain weight as well, right? A lot of times we're building our hotels with the same doors that we do all the other guest rooms, but it needs to be a certain weight. So there's a bunch of things that are required and that needs to be taken into account. This is for those of you that are building new properties, those of you that are renovating, and then those that already have existing ADA rooms. So the first step, right, in what do we do now that I have a lawsuit against me, or what do I do now, right? You're telling me that I have all these problems. Well, how do I, fix this? What's the solution? So if you think that property has a bunch of issues, the first step really is to get a CASP inspection, right? Frankly, it's not that expensive, but this is somebody that is a certified professional in this. They have specialized knowledge. They know every rule by the book, and they're going to tell you every problem that your property has. Now, I'm going to give you a little caveat here. If you decide to go directly to a castle inspector and obtain that report, great. However, that report now becomes discoverable evidence, meaning if there is ever an ADA violation on your property, all an attorney needs to do is send you a subpoena for that report. And then you are required by law to provide them that report. And now they're going to see every single ADA issue that your property has. So why do we ask that you go through our firm to get your ADA CAS report? We don't even add any fees on top of that, or just want to be a defense cover for you. Because if you buy it through our law firm, then now that report that is created is covered under attorney-client privilege. And now somebody cannot ever request or subpoena that document. So that's why we ask you, if you want a CAS report, go through a law firm. It's going to shield you in the end. It's not about us making money there. Again, very transparent. Whatever the CAS inspector charges, that's what we charge you. We just want to offer it, and it's just a benefit to our clients. Frankly, having the CAS report is beneficial, so you at least know what the biggest problems are on your property. Immediately, you could go ahead and start fixing these huge issues, right? And really the second step is any of these visible changes, right? You can start addressing now based off of that CAS report. Now, I get it, times are tough right now. Again, I think it's a pretty affordable report, But if you don't want to end up getting that report, then what you can go ahead and do is focus again on those major areas that your guests and drive-by suits are touching, right? That's the parking lot. That's the signage in your parking lot. That's your front desk. That is all of the accessible routes around your property. Look at those areas and see if they're ADA compliant. Again, my cast guy is really good. Send me photos. You can send them for free. Send me your address, and my cast guy will literally write you a paragraph of, hey, this looks good, or no, you need to fix X, Y, and Z. And you can go and fix those things. I promise it will cost you less than getting a drive-by ADA suit. And then the third really is to try to get the plaintiff not to sue you again, right? Agree not to sue you again. So anytime if you've ever settled with a ADA plaintiff, they're going to have you sign a settlement agreement. We ensure when we draft these settlement agreements that there are two things. One, we ask for a no visit, no suit provision. That means that they promise that they are not going to come back to your property and they promise they will never sue you again. Then I also ask for a notification provision, meaning for some reason, if they were to ever come to your property again, before they sue you, they must give you a 30-day or a 60-day cure period to fix that issue before they try to sue you. This did recently happen. The guy tried to come back like 5 years later and sue the client. The client remembered that he had settled with us. I looked up his settlement agreement, and then immediately that case got dismissed. Another one as well, many of you guys have been sued, right, by Strajnik under Teresa Brooke. We all know that she did pass away, but he has a new plaintiff now, Fernando Gastelum. And guess what? Strajnik is now starting from the top of his list. Everyone he has ever sued under Teresa Brooke, he is re-suing under this new plaintiff, Fernando Gastelum. So if you have been sued by Teresa Brooke, look at what she sued you for and make sure you really did fix those issues at your hotel. Also look out for anything else that might be problematic at your hotel. I promise he is going to file against you for those same issues. He already has against hundreds of other properties, and he's just getting started. So please, please, please make sure that you are protecting your property and that bottom line. All right, so we're going to move away from physical ADA lawsuits and now go more towards website ADA lawsuits. These are increasingly common just because now I don't have to leave my house. I don't have to get in my car. I just need to have a laptop and working internet, and I can find more ADA issues by just going to your website. So for hotels, really, this is really important because a lot of times the first point of contact, right? If the guest isn't going to an OTA, they're going to be going to your direct website. They're looking at your website. They're going to want to look at your rooms, your amenities, check your availability, really look at what the value of your property is. So a lot of people think the ADA really stops at their front door, and it doesn't, right? Unfortunately, there has been cases such as there was a case against Domino's, right? We all know Domino's Pizza. And unfortunately, they did lose the ADA case because what the court said was that because customers are connecting with Domino's stores, physical locations via the website, then that's considered a part of the restaurant and they should have the ADA apply to them as well. So it's pretty simple. Your website, it's a part of the guest experience. Plaintiffs are treating it as part of the ADA compliance review. And so make sure that you are complying with what you need to comply with when it comes to your website. The ADA does have specific reservation rules for hotels specifically. You guys need to make sure that you are allowing individuals with disabilities to reserve accessible rooms, right? So on your website, if you have the room type of a king, the next to it needs to be a accessible king room. right? If you got a 2-bedroom, next to it should be an accessible 2-bedroom. So for every accessible room you got to have that room type listed, not only on your website, you guys, but on the OTAs as well. So make sure your Expedia is showing that, make sure your booking.com is showing that as well. Every room type you got in the property, you got to have it on there as well. You need to make sure that you're identifying and describing whatever the accessible features are of that hotel and of that room to your guests so that your guests can then basically decide whether or not your property meets their own needs. So it's not enough just to say, ADA room available or call us if you need an ADA room. That's just too vague, right? A guest is going to want to know whether it has a roll-in shower, whether there's visual alarms, whether there are certain bars in the room, etc. So every item you got that makes that room accessible, make sure you're going ahead and listing that. Another major requirement is that when an accessible room is reserved, the hotel needs to make sure that you guys are blocking and removing that room from the reservation system and guaranteeing it to that specific guest that is requesting it, right? So practically, this means that on the hotel website, on your OTAs, on your other booking platforms, that's all in sync with each other to ensure that somebody doesn't end up booking an ADA room that now ends up not becoming available. So don't treat ADA rooms as your generic inventory, right? Have a specific room type on your OTA, on your direct website for each of your accessible rooms, and that's going to help make sure that you are compliant. Another common issue that we see is ADA widgets. So if you choose to make your own website or you go with a website creator, that's a little bit more affordable. They may claim that they do ADA accessible websites, but unfortunately, the things that you might not see or that you don't really understand aren't ADA compliant, right? And so there has been a warning by the Department of Justice that says that, that automatic accessible tool that you click, that widget, um, doesn't necessarily work or comply. And so you can get sued for that. So if you do have that widget, it's fine. Just make sure it actually does work. And the second issue is alternative text, right? Um, each of your images basically need to have meaningful alternative text. And I'm going to show you an example on the next slide of what this looks like. But the idea is that let's say that you're blind, right? And there's something called a screen reader. It's something that reads every single item that is on your screen. Well, if somebody puts their mouse, right, or they click a button over a picture, your screen is supposed to read out what that image is. That means for every item on your website, if it's a picture of a pool, it should be a description of what that pool is. If it's a picture of your bathroom, it should be a description of that. However, if your text, right, it's called alt text, if that text is not actually meaningfully describing what that is, well, now you're in violation. Third, color contrast, right? If your text is too light against the background, then now you have guests with low vision. They might not be able to read it, right? Or if you have somebody that has trouble already seeing far or close and they're not able to make text bigger or smaller, now that's going to be an issue. Fourth, inaccessible booking forms, right? So if your guest can't select the dates, if they can't complete their payment, if something is not allowing them to book on your website, whether it's your fault or not, then now you're denying that disabled person from accessing your hotel website, accessing the hotel services by being able to book a room. And then finally, keyboard navigation, right? Some users unfortunately cannot use a mouse. Maybe they don't have hands. And so they're going to want to be able to, select dates and open menus and submit forms and things like that without using their mouse. And they need to be able to, with your website, having that function. So I mentioned earlier about that alt text, right? The first line is an example of bad alt text. It's something like having a file number, right? If you automatically download like an image from Google, it's going to just have alt text attached to it. However, good alt text would say something like, beach dog. Better alt text is going to be actually describing this, right? Dog on beach. And then the best is going to be the most descriptive description, right? Which is dog wearing sunglasses and Hawaiian shirt on beach. Imagine, I like to say, if you close your eyes and you couldn't see the photo, what would you describe the photo as? And that's what the alt text should be. So a way that you can go to your website, you can right click, you can actually save your image. And what does that image save as? A lot of times you're going to see that image saving as like IMG 2034 or some random numbers, right? So if your image is saving under that, then you have an issue with your alt text. And at some point, you might get sued for your website not being compliant. All right. Then we look at your labels, right? A screen reader basically can only announce the labels that you have on your website. So let's say somebody wants to make a reservation and they're clicking each box trying to figure out, okay, well, what am I supposed to enter into this box? Well, if it just says edit every time they click an empty box, that's not telling the person what they need to input, right? So again, close your eyes, imagine you clicked on that box. What should that box tell you? It should say enter in your first name, enter in your last name, enter in your credit card number. Everything you are expecting that guest to enter in should be what that screen reader is actually saying aloud. If they're just saying edit or if they're just saying check box, then you are not meeting that bar. You are not meeting that requirement. Okay. Um, we do have a great website provider we're happy to recommend you to. So if you feel like you need somebody to go and review your website, I think they do free consults. I'm happy to provide you that contact information as well. So have an expert, review your website. They know everything that, or they should know everything that should be in it. So when you are trying to find a new website provider, really interview them as to how much they do know about ADA law. Make sure that you're not just making these changes on your actual website that you're seeing on your computer, but go and look at your website on your phone as well, right? If you have an app maybe through a brand, make sure it's working as well. Make sure through all the platforms that somebody can access your website on, it's working. iPads, phones, laptops, computers, etc. And then just make sure that your website is fully compliant, right? If the claim is weak, then you have defenses. If your website is not compliant, then you don't have defenses. And again, we get into that black and white law. So from a settlement perspective, we want to avoid just fixing only one issue listed in the demand letter, right? We want a broader review so the same plaintiff can't come immediately back with a new claim, just one item. We want you to fix all those items ahead of time. All right. And now we're kind of jumping into our last scenario, right? We've got Linda. I guarantee we have all dealt with Lindas in our life. And Miss Linda decides to sneak in her dog, right? And housekeeping reports it to us, let's just say. We all know this. Well, what we don't want you to do is we don't want your front desk to go to Linda and say, hey, we don't take pets. Or, hey, you need to pay a pet fee for that dog. Or, hey, show me your disability paperwork, right? We can't have our front desk clerks acting on reaction. Nor can we have you guys acting on reaction, right? If you guys are managing your properties. Really, the correct response is going to depend on whether or not that dog is a service animal. Now, we know dogs are supposed to wear service vests if they are a service animal. However, they are not required to do so. So, obviously, if that dog has a vest on it, you don't need to ask, is it a service dog? You actually can't even ask that, right? Just accept it for what it is. However, if they don't have a vest, if it's unclear, right, whether that dog is a service pet or not, then you may ask two questions. These are the magic two questions in ADA. You cannot ask anything else other than these two questions, right? The first, is the dog required because of a disability? That's a yes or no question. And second, what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? Here's the thing, guys. You do need to accept their answers if they are compliant answers, right? There are certain answers that just don't conform. If they are doing a task, oh, they comfort me, period. Well, that's not a service then that's provided actually by a service animal, and you could technically refuse that guest. So, a key word is making sure that the front desk is trained and making sure the guest is also giving you the proper answers that they should, right? We want them to be providing us answers saying that they have a trained service animal, right? A service animal isn't the same thing as a pet. It's not the same thing as an emotional support animal either. So if they are having this dog to provide them comfort or companionship or emotional support, well, that's not going to fly. So look out for these keywords. What we want is just as we want our front desk to be trained, we want these dogs to be trained. We want these dogs to be trained to perform specific work and task related to the person's disability, right? You need to make sure that the guest does have the animal under their control, right? Let's say all of a sudden Linda leaves their service animal in the room and now that dog is peeing everywhere or he's barking, right? Well, Linda needs to get control of her dog. And if Linda doesn't, well, then Linda and her dog need to get kicked out. So if the animal basically is out of control or the person is, or Linda's not able to manage her dog, right? Or your guest isn't able to manage the dog, well, then you can ask that the guest and the animal be removed. Just be careful, right? We don't want them later on coming back and suing you for kicking them out. And so, if you are a part of our Shield membership, you can ask us questions for free all the time. So, shoot us a message. Those of you that are in Shield group, message us and we can advise you on exactly what you need to do from there. But again, the takeaway here is make sure that you guys have a service animal policy, make sure that you train your staff. These two golden questions, if you don't already, should be printed and put on your computer monitor or next to your computer so that your front desk knows exactly what to ask. So with that, you guys, that's all about it that I have for today's presentation. If you guys want a copy of it, feel free to shoot me an email. You can get this QR code and shoot me an email. Otherwise, I am happy to answer any general questions you guys have, any specific ones. If you have specific ones, you can ask me now or you can shoot me an email and we can go from there. Thank you guys so much. Hey Ravi, I'm seeing that you asked a question. Does when you have a CAS inspector in defense, basically you got a CAS inspection done 3 years ago, now you want to use it as a defense now? Yes, you could technically use it as a defense now, as long as nothing at your property actually changed, right? So if that still applies, then yes, you're more than welcome to reapply that report now. And then looks like you had a second question. If we have one ADA room, let's see here, and two rooms that are two queen beds, but one is on the second floor and one's on the first floor, and there's 4 steps to get into the room, does it make it ADA? So it doesn't necessarily make it ADA, right? If you have 4 steps that get into the room. If you'd like, you're
do you need to make it ADA? Like, do you need
oh,
to
do
make
you need
that
to make it ADA?
one two queen bed into an ADA, or is it a pass because you can't physically make?
So it's not necessarily a pass, right? The rule for the ADA means if it is financially going to be extremely bearing on you or a burden on you to then make it ADA compliant, you can actually get a waiver from the city. And then you do not have to actually make that room ADA compliant, but you need to have that waiver on hand from the city. I had somebody that had just one step to get into their property, and they actually got a waiver from the city of Los Angeles not to have to put a ramp there for somebody to get into their building. So
They
if
call
you want
something.
to, sorry, say that again.
That called something specific.
Um, it is. I can send you a copy of what that waiver looks like, and that way you can reach out to the city and ask them for that. But frankly, the city's pretty lenient in offering that, but that's your best line of defense. If you're planning on not making something ADA accessible, just get that waiver on hand and make sure it's predated before a lawsuit, and that's what we're going to use basically against that attorney. And then if they try to continue to sue you, and they try to take it to court, you can actually get all of your attorney's fees reimbursed and things like that as well, because they're taking an action that they should not be taking that against you.
Follow up with you.
Yeah, shoot me an email. And then I got a question about how much is it charged for a website audit? That's a great question for our CASP inspector. I don't do website audits, but he does. So if you shoot me a email, I can go ahead, oh, and with a link of your website, I can go ahead and send that to Michael, and he'd be the one to give us a quote, and then I can send you whatever that number is. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you all for our next webinar. Bye-bye.